ReefDudes is sponsored by Ecotech Marine and Bulk Reef Supply.
Today we're talking calcium reactors, when do you need one, and are they still relevant in 2025? What's going on, guys? Devin from ReefDudes. So I am a big fan of calcium reactors. I feel like they're not as popular these days. There's a few reasons to think for that. One, some people think they're overly complicated, and I also think a lot of people have smaller tanks these days, just because it's a little more economical. Now, speaking of economical, that is the main reason I like a calcium reactor. If you have a larger system, by large, I mean, 150 gallons plus, and it's packed full of stony corals, there is going to be a point where dosing feels expensive. And that's the part when I think it justifies looking into a calcium reactor. And, if you have a big tank with a few tiny corals, stick to dosing. It is cheap, it's easy to dial in. If you, all of a sudden you feel like you're spending, like 60, 70, 80 bucks a month on dosing, that can get expensive when compared to a calcium reactor. This is like pennies in comparison. So long term on a larger system, I think this is extremely economical, and that is kind of the benefit. Now, they're not the cheapest up front. They're definitely more expensive to buy, but once you have it, it is super duper cheap to run. Like for instance, once a year I may buy a bag of reborn media, which is what, 40 bucks. I'll refill my 10-pound CO2 tank, 30 bucks. So that's what, 70 bucks for a year of dosing versus, 70 bucks a month if I was doing like a 2 or 3 part. So long term on a larger system with lots of coral, they definitely make a lot of sense. Now, how they work. So a lot of people are overwhelmed by them, but they're honestly very simple devices. It's basically like a 1-part dosing. You take tank water, you feed it into your reactor, and once it's full, water will flow back out. Now your output is called your effluent. And how it works is the calcium reactor has a recirculation pump on it, which basically sucks water in from the top, blows it out the bottom and works its way back up. And that circulates the water through it. Now on the side or somewhere on it, there's going to be a spot where you inject CO2. Now the CO2 is going to lower the pH inside of the reactor. Now generally I like to run mine around 6.5-ish. So 6, like I have my Apex set up with a pH probe, so at 6.5 or lower, it turns off the CO2. If it goes above 6.5, it turns it back on. So if you want to make your life easy, just have a pH probe, set it to that range, and you'll be set. Then all you got to do to adjust your alkalinity, your calcium dosing, is adjust the flow through the reactor. So yeah, very, very simple. CO2 in, we have an input and output for your water from your tank, and otherwise it just recirculates inside of it. Now that's the simplest way. Now if you have one without a pH probe, you can always use this a standard pH test and test the output. I always like to have one with a pH probe just because it makes it simpler to dial it back in. Now all the standard calcium reactor medias are going to be dosing your alkalinity and your calcium. You can get magnesium rocks as well to basically dose all three. So you have your 1-part machine that's dosing alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, super duper simple. I still do like to have, some manually dosing stuff on hand just for the odd adjustment. Sometimes 1 pounder your tank might consume a bit more magnesium, or maybe it consumes more alk than calcium. So it is nice to have a little bit on hand to do the tweaks. But this does, I'm gonna say the bulk of all the dosing in my systems. Now, as for where to start out your parameters, again, for the pH within it, so ideally get one with a pH probe. There is standalone pH controllers, or you can use the aquarium control if you already have one. Like for instance, my Apex controls my solenoid. It turns it on and off based on the pH inside of here. Keeps it within that 6.5, 6.55 range. Then the only thing I do to tweak my dosing is adjust the effluent going through it. So currently on my tank, I'm doing about 24 liters a day, so about 1 liter per hour through the tank. Now, if my alkalinity is dropping, all I do is turn it up and dose a little bit more. And if I see my levels rising too high, then I turn it down a little bit. So you just raise the flow through it or lower the flow through it. So it's really that simple. They are really, really easy. Now, for knowing how to tweak it, they can take a few days or a week to dial in, and usually you just make little tweaks each day. If you have a pH probe in it, I'm a big fan of the carbon doser. It's very easy to adjust the bubble counter on it, and I'll just manually adjust it until it's basically pegged at 6.5, 6.55. And the aquarium controller really doesn't do much. It's really just there for a backup. Now, there is a point where if you are pushing too much water through it, you're going to lose that concentration of alkalinity. Now, for the most part, once your pH is set, all you got to do is adjust your effluent flow rate through it. Your alkalinity is going down. up the flow through a little bit, you know, maybe bump up to 25 or 26 liters per day, and you're all good. But there will be a point where you'll be upping your flow and it's not going to be raising your alkalinity. So you're like, hey, what's happening? Usually at this point, it's because you're pushing water through it too fast that it doesn't have enough dwell time to fully dissolve the media. In that case, you just have to increase how much CO2. So you just lower your set point of your pH a little bit. So that's kind of like a long-term tweaking consideration. So the more contact time it has, the more time it has to dissolve it. And the more it dissolves, the higher the alkalinity is going to be in your effluent. That's kind of the deeper technical, but overall, it is extremely easy. Put in your pH probe, set it to, you know, that 6.5 to 6.6 range. Take a dosing pump, push water in, let water flow out. And all you do is tweak the water, how much water is flowing out, and that's how you adjust your dosing. Calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, all in one. So a super duper simple way to dose on that front. You can get a second chamber, and all you do is pump the output of this into the input of the second chamber, and the output of that to your tank. The advantage of doing that is the second chamber gives a little more time to off-gas the CO2, and that will give you a little more extra in your alkalinity dosing. It's going to add more media goes through, and it's going to help raise the pH a little bit. So as that media sucks up and melts of some of the carbonic acid, it's going to raise the pH. In my experience, I get about a 0.1 pH boost on the effluent output from a secondary chamber. But again, it depends how big it is, how much dwell time it has, and whatnot. Now, what are the downsides of a calcium reactor? Well, the upfront cost. They're not the cheapest to buy upfront. Long-term, super duper cheap. But right out the gate, you know, it's definitely a bit more of an investment. And the other big kind of consideration is you generally will have a lower pH in your tank. So, you know, not as good for coral growth to an extent if your pH is too low. That being said, I think the stability of the big three that it doses outweighs that by a large factor. And just how economical is, how much money it's going to save, again, is like a huge plus. So lower pH is honestly the biggest thing that I'd say is the downside, that aside from the cost. But otherwise, it is extremely simple. It does sound overly complicated, but it's a pump that recirculates. You inject some CO2, water flows in, water flows out. That's it. So they're really simple once you kind of grasp how they work, and they are so cheap to dose compared to basically like every other method. Maintenance-wise, about once a year, I do like to maintain the reactor. What I'll do is I'll pop off the lid, and I'll take all the media out and I'll rinse it. Sometimes it gets a little bit like sludgy or built up inside over time. So I'll usually just take it out, I'll dump it in a strainer and under the tap, just give it a rinse. Just like rinse it all out, make all the media nice and fresh. I'll take some new media, re-top it off again. I usually bring it to about a couple inches from the top, just to leave some room for the pH probe. And that's about it. Yeah, otherwise they're super duper easy. You know, depending on how much you dose, you know, for me, a 10-pound CO2 tank lasts probably about a year to a year and a half or more. And the media inside, again, it lasts ages. You know, once a year I top off, you know, a bag or a partial bag, depends how much I dose. And otherwise they're super duper cheap and very efficient. All right, guys, hopefully this helps answer any questions you guys have on calcium reactors. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, be sure to hit that like button. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys on the next video.